Hey friends, welcome back to another Seed Talk episode with Lisa and Layne. Hey Layne.
Hello, I'm getting a little cold just thinking about our topic today. Are you?
I have been so cold the last
Yeah,
10 days dealing with what we're talking about today. So, yes, it is a chilly subject.
it
So,
is.
friends, before we jump into this wintry mix of discussion, just want to remind you that this podcast is brought to you by thegardenersworkshop.com, which is where Layne and I call home base. That's where everything that we do is rooted in. We have an online garden shop, a fully stocked online course library over there. And friends, we just invite you to check it out anytime. So, friends, let's dive in or let's start shoveling. What do you think, Layne?
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about winter storms. And Lisa and I are looking at very snowy scenes outside our houses today because we've had a winter storm come through recently, and that just sparked the desire to do this episode. So we're going to talk about how you can best prepare for a storm like that coming through, what you can do during and after the storm, and then we're going to take a little trip down memory lane and ask Lisa to recall some of the worst winter storms that she can remember and what ended up happening to her cool flowers.
Those sound like questions that I get every single day. Great.
Yes.
Fine. All right, let's do it.
Okay, Lisa. So to set the scene, let's just say it's the middle of winter. You have cool flowers outdoors, overwintering in your field or in your garden. They're covered with hoops and row cover. And you see in the weather report, there is a winter storm coming in. What do you do?
Okay, so if you all are not watching this over on YouTube, I invite you to go over there because there's some great images that Layne has put together. And we're looking at an image of my garden that got snowed with the covers up, still on. And so the warning is don't do this.
Yeah.
Always, when any type of frozen precipitation is expected, whether that's ice or snow, always take your covers down. First off, snow and ice are a far better insulator and protector than a row cover could be. But what happens is that row cover gets smashed down on top of your plants and, in fact, can smother and kill them. So I know it's really hard to take your row covers down when, a storm's coming. The last thing you think is, oh, let's take my coat off. I'm going to just run around out here without my coat on. It's a little bit different out in the garden. And if they're especially going to get a snow cover, they'll be so cozy under that snow that they are going to do just fine.
Yeah. So there are two different options for those row covers, Lisa. So the first is you could choose to just take them down and leave them out there in the garden, or you could actually choose to take them inside, away from the snow and ice. So can you talk about those two different options and the advantages and disadvantages of each?
Sure. So I just did both of those exercises. So the decision I make whether I leave the row covers down, laying in the beds, laying in the pathways, or pick the row covers up and stow them somewhere where they aren't exposed to freezing temperatures so that they won't be frozen, is I look at the forecast after the snowstorm, like a 10-day forecast. And so famously here in Virginia, what happens is we'll get snow, and then all of a sudden the days will start to get high temperatures again, going up in the 50s, which quickly melts the snow. But the nights are going to deep dive into the teens sometimes and in the low 20s. And I do everything I can to protect the foliage and the performance of my cool flowers. So I don't want to shock them with that kind of behavior. So if it's going to snow and you look at the forecast and it's going to stay cold, so the snow is going to be sitting on your garden, well, for a week or more or something, I just leave the covers in the garden, right?
Yeah.
Because by the time I need to put them back up, the snow will be ultimately melted at some point in time. But if it stays cold, it's not going to melt. So the blanket will be there to protect them at night. It's when it gets warm fairly quickly, but the nights are really still going to be deep dives that I say to myself, as I did this last Friday, I think it was, that it was going up into the 50s, but that night was going to be 21 degrees. And I thought, you know what? That's like torture to my plants, right? So I literally, before that snow came, I went out to my garden and took all the row covers up, bundled them up, put them on the golf cart and drove the golf cart into a protected building where they wouldn't freeze. And the snow came and it was great for 24 hours. And then
Yeah.
Saturday afternoon, I mean, there's dripping going on everywhere because all the snow was melting, but it was going to be 19 degrees that night. So I was able to go get my covers, bring them back out, and quickly and efficiently and easily put them all back on. And that's where they are now. So my plants have a buffer to these crazy, swings that of these temperature changes.
So those are great options if you're expecting snow or some sort of frozen precipitation, like Lisa mentioned. What if someone's going to have a winter storm and it's just going to be extremely cold and windy
Without snow,
without snow? Let's go with that scenario.
yeah, so I mean, if it's just cold and windy, leave your covers up. That's exactly what the covers were made for, right? Was to break the wind, so that the covers break the wind instead of your little plants taking direct hits over and over and over again.
When might you consider bringing a second layer of lightweight row cover into the garden?
Sure. So I have 3 beds, I think, out there right now that have double row cover on them. Those are for plants that are on the edge of the winter hardiness zone, like stuff that I'm either testing, which I'm not sure what winter hardiness zone they're winter hardy to, which that's, our whole method now is finding more cool season hardy annuals that we just never really knew that was the missing ingredient, right? To apply the cool flower concept. And so I double cover those. And then if it's really going to do deep dives and a lot of that crazy up and down temperatures, because you see the covers kind of buffer that temperature swing. If I have a crop that's really important to me, which every year that crop was always bells of Ireland. I mean, we loved them for bouquet making. Our florists loved them. I mean, we just never had enough. I would double cover them during those types of those kind of weather situations that would happen. But yeah, you can easily double just to get twice the protection, particularly if you get an unusually low temperature for where you are.
Right. And especially if you're growing any cool flowers that are right on the edge of being hardy where you are, or you're even trying something that's maybe hardy to a half zone warmer than you. That's a great option.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, now we're going to move on to what do you do during and then after a winter storm, which you kind of touched on it before, Lisa, but what do you do during it and what are you assessing? And then when would you decide it's time to bring those covers back out?
Sure. So this is a great image. And this was just from this last Friday, I think. You can see my covers are not up. They're actually in a building. They aren't underneath that snow there. You can see the wire hoops and all the bag. It's okay to leave the bags in the garden. It's the
Right.
covers that get frozen and then you can't spread them out and it just makes it really difficult. So covers were down. And then the minute I take the covers up, then I start thinking, oh my gosh, I bet it's not even going to snow. The snow probably won't even hit us, and then I'll have to put the
Yeah.
cover back out there, right? So I was really happy with this image because you can see the beds are covered. And when the beds are covered like this in snow, they're totally protected. I mean, they are very cozy underneath that layer of snow. And then after the winter storm, so Saturday afternoon, like 3 to 4 o'clock, and it gets dark at 5:30 here. I was taking Tucker for a walk around the farm, and it wasn't even on my radar that the snow has already started to melt. Right. I'd been inside for a snow day all day and kind of enjoying that. And when I got around to the back of the garden, the pathways all still had snow, which meant my row covers would have been completely encased in snow. But guess what? The tops of all of my beds that had that black biodegradable film on them had all melted. There was pretty much no snow left, and all I could see were my plants. Not a good scene when I pulled out my phone and looked at the weather, and that night was going down into the high teens. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to bring my covers back out. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of what I'm looking for. And it is never an easy decision. I mean, I get lots of questions like, when do I bring them back out? You just have to go with your gut. And it's literally just a matter of work, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I have enough covers. I think to myself, all right, the threat of snow on the cover is the biggest pain point. That's like, okay, I can't let that happen. But anything else, go with your gut. That's what my method is.
When would you start to look at your plants and try to assess anything for potential damage? And can you also just talk about what do the plants typically look like after an event like this? What's normal versus what's potentially concerning?
So I used to say very frequently, the scariest thing that a flower farmer does in January and February is to peek under the covers. That has
Yeah.
nothing to do with snow, but it's looking under the row covers because at that time of the year, they're frozen as popsicles. They're supposed to be wilted. They're freezing. I mean, literally, they're really cold. That was the whole peeking under the row cover thing. You peek and it's like they're all wilted and laying over and still just looking terrible, but it's like they're frozen. How do you think you would look living outside? Literally 24/7. They're dehydrated probably because of the cold. And so, yeah, wilting would not be surprising to me at this point. It's really hard to tell. I mean, you can tell. I mean, when the tops of the beds had the snow melted off of them, but yet the pathways still had snow. I walked up and down some of the aisles to look, and it is very scary. I think, oh gosh, those plug-in plants, plants that Bobo had just recently plugged in to some of the plantings because we had lost plants for whatever reason, they didn't look so hot. They've only been
Yeah.
around for a couple of 3 weeks. That's why we say it's just so essential to plant on time for your planting windows, right? This is when this really hits home with you. Those plants that weren't well established, they look a little iffy out there. And what does that look like? Well, they're brown completely, and just either non-existent. Sometimes they just vanish. And then you look at their neighbor who's green and looks cold but healthy. You start to really realize it. And so I would say to you, I would never pull anything out this time of the year, ever. But we have a lot of seeds restarted in our building. We call them insurance seedlings. And I didn't restart everything. I just thought, that's a really important crop. And I know that it does really well very early spring planting, which is the next window coming, right? And I thought, why would we not restart that? And anything because I have a small garden space, y'all, I can't give up, a quarter of plants not making it for whatever reason. So they just tend to look dead. But again, I would restart the seeds, but I would never pull anything out at this time of the year. We wait until very early spring. And when we go to plant in very early spring, sometimes Bobo will make a decision and say, you know what, when I touched this stem, there literally was no roots underneath of it. We'll replant for sure. But if it's
Yes.
questionable, we don't pull it out.
All right, now we're just going to talk about some of the worst winter storms you have experienced, Lisa. And if you can let us know what ended up happening to your cool flowers that you had outside overwintering during those storms.
So the image that we're looking at now, the one on the left is Bells of Ireland, totally frosted over, right? And bells, plants survive this kind of behavior, just getting frosted like this really, really well. And the saving grace for the plant on the left that the plant on the right didn't have was size. So these bells of Ireland that we're looking at are pretty small, immature plants. They're low to the ground. They're not tall to be wind whipped, in addition to all the other aggressive behavior of winter storms. And so planting at the proper time for your region, and no, nobody knows it. I know that weather's changing. You just have to do the best you can. I have tended in recent years to kind of plant later instead of earlier because the image on the right is an example of that. Those are snapdragons that got way too big before they went into winter. And they got planted early. That's in my landscape, actually. They got planted earlier than they should have. And then we got a cold snap of snow, and those tall plants with that much vegetation just cannot sustain that kind of behavior. Not only do the plants rock, which rocks the roots, it wind whips them and just basically stresses them a lot. And that can happen. Both of these end up surviving. I mean, I am a big believer that if you're growing within your winter hardiness zone, meaning you're not trying to grow something that doesn't isn't supposed to survive your winter. If you're only growing those things that do, it's not really the cold that kills them. It's the wet feet, and the fact that the soil doesn't dry out. And we lose very few, if any, well-established cool flowers from winter cold and winter storms. It's the
Yeah.
other conditions that are a problem.
We also do have a podcast, episode 73, on 7 common causes of cool flower plant loss over the winter. So you may also want to check that out if you'd like to hear more about that topic. Lisa, are there any flowers that always seem to make it for you most of the time? And are there some that you just don't trust as much?
It's so funny. Yeah. I mean, what clearly jumps into my mind, Orlea is white lace flower is such a hardy little plant. I mean, when I uncovered those beds on Friday to stow away the covers, it like outshone everybody else on that row. The Nigella, which there's like 6 varieties of Nigellas planted on the back on the rest of the bed behind the Orlea, and they are like they need help. I need a hand over here, is what they were saying to me. They just don't look as happy in these conditions. Chinese forget-me-nots look really, really happy. And then there's, Sweet William and snaps and rudbeckias just seem to survive no matter what comes down the pike. I remember one distinctive year, this was years ago, when we were in high production. We had started a bunch of Sweet William Amazon, which is my go-to, Sweet William. We had started a bunch of additional purples because I thought the others were croaked. Well, then it turned out that they weren't croaked. And I said, all right, it was like mid-January, not the time we're supposed to be planting around here. I said, what do we have to lose? There's a spot back there with film on it with no plants. Let's plant tiny. I mean, Layne, they weren't even an inch tall. But I thought,
Oh,
why not plant them? What's the loss, right? It was winter.
yeah.
We had nothing else to do. We planted, I mean, there was like a tray of 240 of them. It was a lot of plants. And we planted those little purples. And I'm telling you, they were the best Sweet William I've ever grown. They just took hold, got established, and went well. I'm not suggesting to anybody to plant in January. I'm not sure exactly what the science was behind that. But that just goes to show you, Sweet William is one tough cookie, and it's an in-demand crop. So she's definitely, or he's definitely on that.
So it sounds like we just need to send some hot chocolate to your Nigella then, and
I'm
it'll be.
telling you, it's really, really true. Then those ones that live on the edge, dill looked great out there, but I know that if it was not protected, like it's one of the ones when we went down to 19 degrees, that would have probably whacked it if I hadn't gotten the covers back on it. Nigellas can be dicey. Sweet peas always act like they need a hand, but they don't. The vine
Yeah.
will die out on the top, but they always just rally and come back and make me really happy. And we have several that we're testing this year that the verdict is still out on. And I tell you, a couple other little hardy ones are Buplurum and the giant poppy pods. Both of them just seem to really pull.
Yes.
But once again, it is all about planting on time. And I'll tell you that we direct sowed a little bit later this year than we should have because I was banking on that fall was going to run longer than shorter. And that didn't, in fact, happen this year. So we got a little caught with our, door open. So, but it's your conditions that are the most important.
Yeah. So planting on time so that you have well-established plants going into the winter, that's your best protection against these types of storms. And then use your best judgment to adjust your row covers as needed, depending on what exactly is coming your way.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that does it for this episode on preparing for and dealing with all sorts of winter storms. Let us know in the comment section over on YouTube or using the form linked in the show notes if you've dealt with winter storms and which cool flowers seem to do the best for you, which seem to survive, which don't seem to make it all the time. We'd love to hear all that. And please be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. And thank you so much again for joining us. We appreciate all of you.
And so, friends, until we meet again, ciao.
Bye.